Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by. Hope you're all doing really well. Here today for our weekly Wednesday night live stream. Sorry, the camera's a little bit janky. We're gonna get it fixed there. Brianna's here, which is always great to see. Great to have so many folks here as well. Lots to talk about tonight. There's some new details about Matt Gaetz, specifically that he is part of the investigation now includes potential issues with a trip he took to the Bahamas. And so certainly we're going to be talking about that, because when you talk about what he is, alleged to have done, the Bahamas is seen as a destination for that sort of thing. And we'll get into that. We're also going to talk about a couple things that were written today, or at least published today, which really show just how mask off Republicans and conservatives are going when it comes to their attack on democracy. Specifically, an article in a Republican-leaning, conservative National Review blatantly saying we need fewer voters, but we need better voters as well, right?
Well, and it's funny, obviously that writer didn't mean himself.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? He's not like disenfranchise me, right? You know what I mean? We'll also talk a little bit about some of the continued Republican grifts. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the recent left-wing drama about AOC, how some of it is valid, but I think much of it is overblown. We're going to get into a bunch of this. I think we have a couple early super chats. Mm-hmm. Wait, let me just, there they are.
Oh, and from Samantha Sider with the first super chat. So she said, just joined Left Turn Canada a few minutes ago, which is, of course, your podcast with David.
Or Andy.
Yeah, sorry.
Andy. So, that's my new Canadian-focused podcast. It's a weekly podcast. We usually release episodes either late Thursday, early Friday, but, sort of towards the end of the week, covering what's going on in Canadian politics from the left. Weekly podcast, usually talk about a couple big issues. In the recent one, we talked about how Ontario has failed to get people vaccinated, but we've also talked a bit about how educational reforms in Alberta absolutely fail to represent Indigenous people, religious minorities, LGBTQ folks, and basically everyone. And so unlike with YouTube, most podcasts, unless you're like a big dog, there's no ads. And so, one of the ways people can support that podcast is by becoming a patron. And you get perks ranging from everything from, ad-free episodes if we ever do have them, to early episodes, to a special Discord, and in some cases, the ability to, have a question asked and answered on our show live or, on recording. We do have some broader goals to reach, like when we, hit a certain goal, I believe 500 a month, we'll start doing a Twitch live stream version of the podcast and things like that.
Unfortunately, I'm not in the podcast, so I know that's a big letdown, but
yeah.
One day.
We're probably going to lose all of our existing support because Brianna is not a part of it. Although, there's no reason why Brianna couldn't be a guest on an episode of Left Turn Canada.
I am incredibly engaging.
Very much so. Almost too engaging.
Okay, so our second super chat is from John Barlich. And John says, roses is red, violets is blue. Nice to see you today.
John, you're a regular Shakespeare of the 20th century. You're fantastic, John. Thank you so much for your wordsmithing and for your support. Well, Oronim says, your wife is too beautiful for you. Oronim, you are objectively correct. I mean, my feelings are hurt, but my brain is like, well, I mean, look, she is. She's far too beautiful for me.
That's embarrassing.
Now, I'm going to ask a couple quick things. One, everyone give the stream a like. Helps to bring more people to it. And two, leave a comment. How much more beautiful is Bree than I am?
That's all right.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that. Although there is a lovely comment there about Demetrios. I can't find it now, but...
Oh, how
that he looks like me, I think.
Dimitrios
He
very
does,
much.
yeah.
Dimitrios very much does look like
I'm
Brie.
not sure how these recessive genes won out over these very dominant genes, but it
Yeah.
happened. So
Look, the roll of the dice. Sometimes you roll a 6, right? You know what I mean? So
sometimes you roll double 20s.
yeah. Well, yeah. Like Dimitrios is fantastic. We love him very much, and he's just the greatest little boy. You guys get a glimpse of him every now and then when I share some pictures or I share some video clips. But he's fantastic. He is. He's just the best.
Okay, I think we have some questions coming in through the chat about AOC. Do you see that there?
Yeah, people are saying, well, do we think she's being treated too harshly? I mean, I do to some degree. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I think that part of the issue is that in isolation, a lot of the claims about her are fair. It's just like, so they're like, should she be more critical of Biden? Yes. Should she be maybe more willing to flex, and not just her, but the progressives in the House, be more willing to flex their muscle in holding up a bill potentially, because they don't individually have the power of Manchin, because Manchin on his own can hold up a bill, right? Manchin is literally, or Sinema or any one Senate Democrat can hold up a bill. But hypothetically, AOC, Pramila Jayapal, Ilhan Omar, Corey, but the squad, there's more than enough of the squad and other progressives to potentially hold up some bills in the House. That their numbers are bigger than the Democratic majority over the Republicans. It wasn't like that in 2018 because there was less progressives and the Democratic majority was way bigger. This time they do have that power, and they haven't necessarily used it yet. Maybe they have behind the scenes, maybe they've threatened behind the scenes, but they haven't made that public showing like Joe Manchin. But then people will carry that to AOC is a betrayer, AOC is a sellout, AOC is no better than Pelosi, AOC should be primaried. We would have been better off with Joe Crowley than AOC, I've heard some people say. Like that's where it gets crazy. People are taking legitimate criticism and then carrying it to illogical conclusions. And then in some cases, I don't always feel the criticism is necessarily 100% justified. Although I do have a clip I want to play a little bit later that talk a bit about it. Brie, you wanted to say something though, right?
Yeah, but I'll wait for a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, it's hard to get rid of Manchin, folks. It really is. The reality of the Senate is that there's 100 seats, and he is the tie-breaking vote. He is the one person on any potential bill that can stop it, because you're almost getting no Republicans. And you're certainly not going to get very many Republican votes on a bill that Manchin's voting against. Like, you might get some bills where Manchin, all the Democrats plus Murkowski and Collins. You'll get a few of those. But you're not going to get very many bills where Murkowski votes yes and Manchin votes no. And so you basically need Manchin on almost every bill. It's also hard to get rid of him because the nature of West Virginia politics is that it's a very conservative state. It's not necessarily right-wing on all issues, but it's hard for progressives to do well there, right? It's hard for progressives to do well there. And recent history has shown that outside of Manchin, it's really difficult for the left to have any traction in West Virginia. So it's not like we're talking about Sinema, who has another Democrat next to her in Mark Kelly, who's casting better votes. So for instance, you had Mark Kelly vote for the minimum wage increase from Arizona, and Sinema vote against. With West Virginia, Joe Manchin's he might be the only Democrat you elect from there. And so if you primary him, you'll likely fail. And if you succeed, that person would likely lose. Look, Paula Jean Swearingen gave it a good go, but she lost 70-30. It's one of the reddest states in terms of voting records. So you might not get rid of him. I mean, I think the way you get rid of Manchin, honestly, is you don't get rid of him. You just need to somehow find a way to win a few more seats to neutralize his balance of power.
Well, what's his appeal, though, to West Virginians? Like, what makes West Virginians vote for someone like Manchin rather than just a straight-up Republican?
He has this kind of position as, like, he's very bipartisan. He's very understanding of the culture. He voted with Trump significantly less than the average Republican, but far more than most other Democrats. And so I think for people in West Virginia, they're very much like, this guy represents like an old school kind of Democrat. And historically, it used to be a blue state. Mm-hmm. And he's open to embracing social conservatives, at least from time to time. And, he doesn't want to raise the minimum wage too much. And so he kind of balances a lot of these Republican ideologies and sort of represents almost a position like a moderate Republican, but he just happens to be a Democrat. Mm-hmm. And on a few issues, he'll be more Democratic though, right? Like he never supported Trump's elimination of healthcare, for instance. But he's found a political niche. And I think it's like, I don't know if even if you found somebody exactly like him, I don't know if they could succeed as a Democrat. Part of it's inertia too, mm-hmm. right? Like he kind of came into the position, and it's likely the case that if he retires, the seat's going to go Republican, even if they run another Manchin style candidate, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's funny though, because the other senator from West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito, she's a Republican. But if you look at her voting record, it's actually not super right-wing. So kind of ironically, the state has a relatively moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat representing it, even though it's a fairly red state. Because Capito, if you look at the graph, she doesn't vote hardcore right like, a lot of pro-Trump senators did.
Yeah, so Samantha says if you could get DC statehood into law, then you would only need either Manchin or Sinema instead of both.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example. If you get DC made into a state, almost certainly, no guarantees in politics, of course, and, long term, who knows what happens, but DC, at least as it exists right now, is very, very much a blue state. It is 100%, if it existed as a state, it would be bluest blue. Like 100% without a doubt, hardcore true blue. Like no nuance. It would be like Vermont. Like very different demographically. Vermont is white and rural. DC is overwhelmingly like diverse and urban. But very much like Vermont in that it's guaranteed Democrat. Mm-hmm. Guaranteed Democrat. And so you're right. If you could hypothetically add that, and everything else stayed the same, then this election would have had 102 senators instead of 100.
Or same with Puerto Rico.
Same with Puerto Rico, although Puerto Rico's, it's tricky because...
Puerto Rico's an unorganized state, is it not?
It's a territory. It's a territory, and it is a... it has...
What's the difference between a territory and an unorganized state? Because I was under the impression that as an
There is no such thing as... There's unorganized territories. And unincorporated places. There's 4 distinct terms. CGP Grey does a good video on it.
Oh.
Yeah. But Puerto Rico is a territory. There's a real debate about if Puerto Rico wants to be a state. Some Puerto Ricans want to be a country.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where...
Whereas DC, it's unanimity.
That's where I was going with Puerto Rico, is that they need to have a vote in order to decide, like, what they actually want to do.
Yeah. Well, and also there is a smaller chance that Puerto Rico they have a bit more Republicans there, so it's likely that it'll more often than not elect Democrats, but not as necessarily guaranteed as DC, right?
No.
But let's say because DC, they want statehood, everyone wants it. There's no debate really within DC. They want statehood, but the reality would be that. Then you would have had 52 Democrats and 50 Republicans, meaning that with Harris as the tiebreaker, you wouldn't need Manchin or Sinema on bills, at least on reconciliation bills. You still run into the problem, though, that you're going to need 60, 61 votes or whatever to pass any non-reconciliation legislation.
Okay, so we have a super chat from John Barlett. He said, "Hey, there was a candidate running for city council that looked like Mike from the Humanist Report. His name was Dustin. Good, and he won."
That's great. I love Mike from the Humanist Report is fantastic. Guys, if you haven't checked out the Humanist Report, go check him out. A lot of you know me from him. I don't know if people particularly here, but a lot of people know me from when I co-hosted the Humanist Report and things like that, when I did a fill-in episode for Mike back during the primaries last year. But he's great, and it's great to see that Dustin Good won. You might call it good news. So, John, thank you so much for the support and for that little tidbit. One thing, folks, if you're just hopping in, leave a comment saying hi, friendly chat, and 2, please consider clicking the like button. When you click that like button and leave a comment, that signals to YouTube that this is a fun stream, that everyone's having a good time, and they're more likely to suggest it to other viewers. So that'd be very helpful for me.
So we have a question from Raw Material ENT. He says, or they say, sorry, why are the poorest states red?
I mean, that's a good question, right? I mean, it definitely does seem like, quote unquote, people are voting against their interests, right? I mean, are the states red because they're poor, or are they poor because they're red, right? I don't know, right? There are some fairly wealthy red-ish states like Texas and Florida. Now, I know they're not deep red, and Texas especially seems to be trending purple, maybe faster than Florida is. But I think one of the factors is that most of the red states, not all, but most of the red states don't have like the same level of urbanity, right? Urban is a big one. And I think increasingly a lot of economies are driven by cities. And states where a bigger portion of the population is rural tend to be conservative. Now, there are exceptions, of course. Like I said, Vermont and Maine both voted Democrat, Vermont heavily, and it is a fairly rural state, where the largest city would be a tiny suburb in many other states. Like Burlington is not a very large city. I think Kingston, Ontario, where I'm from, is bigger, and the capital of that state is like 30,000 people, Montpellier, right? Mm-hmm. So, the reality is there are some, urban red states, and there are some rural blue states, but I think that really has a major effect. Like, these cities are driving a lot of wealth, they're driving a lot of education, they're driving a lot of these sorts of things, and that is creating this sense where states that are more rural tend to be redder, and those rural states tend to be poorer, right? Again, exceptions. Alaska's a mostly rural red state that actually has a high per capita income. It's not necessarily well distributed there, but, there's a lot of like oil jobs and, high paid jobs up in Alaska. They have a high per capita income. But if you look, I mean, most cities, even in red states, tend to be more Democratic leaning, right? And so as states see the population become more and more diverse and urban, they become more progressive. Look at Georgia. Georgia historically was a very red state, right? For most of its history, or at least if you exclude the fact that we're talking about like Jim Crow, Dixiecrats, it was never a progressive blue state. But as more and more people move into Atlanta and into the suburbs around Atlanta, that becomes a major factor. And it creates a situation where these cities become a bigger and bigger portion of the state, and cities are where a lot of wealth is generated. That creates more blue states. It also, I think, has a role because a lot of red states tend to have right-wing governments that don't invest in healthcare. They don't invest in education. They're generally right-to-work states. And so when you say, like look at Kentucky, like when Mitch McConnell voted against the $2,000 checks, if you go all the way back to after the presidential election but before the Georgia primaries, remember that Bernie was doing like a soft filibuster for the $2,000 checks. We remember this, right? And so during that, he said to Mitch McConnell, he said, you know, Mitch, like a third of the country's 30, 50 or whatever it was, poorest counties are in your state. They're in your state. Because there's a large like rural population in Kentucky, right? And I think that, you know, Republicans, because of that, it creates this situation where their states are poor, even if, I don't know if the state itself is poor, but the people in the state are poor, because that's the policy outcomes, is to keep people poor. That's what they do, right? Another factor is, and this is relatively recent, because again, historically, not all of these states were red states. Remember, Bill Clinton was a governor from Arkansas. Al Gore, he didn't ultimately carry his state, but he was a senator, I believe, from Tennessee, right?
Was he?
Yeah. Jimmy Carter was president from Georgia. And it used to be the case that states like California and Vermont were red states. Not that long ago, necessarily, right? And so the fact of the matter is, you have a growing cleavage in American politics based on education in particular. Education is one of the now biggest factors in determining how you vote, right? It's not, I don't think it's yet as big as race, for instance, but in recent years, you've been seeing that college degree holders are more likely to vote Democrat.
Which is interesting, because that's been a trend that has started in Canada before we see it in the U.S.
Yeah, until fairly recently, I think even going back to the 90s, maybe even early 2000s, degree holders were more likely to be Republican. They were more likely to be Republican. But education wasn't as big a predictor back in those days. Education has become more democratically based and more predictive. And in general, having education makes you more likely to earn more money. Of course, not all cases. There's plenty of blue-collar jobs, even some that don't require a degree, that pay very well. And there are many people with university degrees that don't make a lot of money. But again,
sure, but you pay with your life, so.
Yeah, but on average, you know, education correlates with income. And so well-educated societies with a lot of good-paying white-collar jobs tend to make for richer states, and those red states where they don't have a lot of education and stuff don't necessarily have that same base. And you're seeing this in certain hybrid states. This is one of the reasons Texas is becoming purple. It's not just because the older, whiter people are passing on, and there's a younger, more Latino population rising up. And so the racial balance of the state is changing, but it's also that you're getting a lot of like tech industry jobs, white collar jobs, corporations moving into Texas. And, you know, these people might not necessarily be hyper left progressives. Like, I wouldn't necessarily call Elon Musk and Joe Rogan progressives, but they're not necessarily traditional right-wing conservatives either. And so the state is changing in some ways. It's changing in some ways, and that's based on the fact that it's recruiting in places like Austin and other big cities. It's recruiting a certain type of person, right? It's recruiting a certain type of person that even if they're not like you know, typical Democratic progressives like you know, say like that you could just put into the Bernie base or whatever, it is nonetheless a major it's nonetheless something that, for lack of a better term, makes the state more purple. You make a state like Texas more purple, not just by adding progressives, but by adding moderates, right? If you add more moderates to Texas, it becomes bluer in that sense. Well, Samantha says Dems can't write off the South. That's where a lot of black people live, and you can change these states if you invest in the electorate. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Look, we've been critical of Stacey Abrams for being a neoliberal on this channel, but my goodness, did she not prove a lot of the traditional discourse wrong, that you could win in Georgia? And you could win in Georgia because, one, there's a lot of black voters there. When you energize black voters as the Democrats, you always have a chance to win. And two, Atlanta, not only its black population, but its white population is growing much more educated and much more progressive, and suburbia is becoming much more, if not Democratic, then less Republican, right? I believe we have a couple.
Yeah, so Ada Martinez with the super chat there, and a little dancing plum, or what is that? That's not a plum.
It's a pear giving a thumbs up.
Yes, pear giving a thumbs up. And then we have Marvin McKinnon, who's just become a new member of the Support Left content. That's a channel member, right?
Yeah, so Marvin, thank you so much. Well, Ida, thank you so much for your support and for the little pear giving the thumbs up, and he's wearing a workout bandana thing on his head. Thank you so much. Not bandana, what's that? Headband. On his head. Thank you so much. And Marvin, thank you for becoming a channel member. It's, again, for people who don't know what that is, it's sort of like becoming a supporter of the channel like on Patreon, but it's sort of baked into YouTube. I give a lot of the same perks. So for instance, in the next few days, Marvin, you'll see your name on my end cards during my traditional videos. So if you support me as a member on Patreon or on YouTube, you get little perks like that. And in addition, the people you can see with the little logos next to their name, those indicate that they're a channel member, and the color indicates for how long. The longest members have, I believe, pink and red logos. They've been members for many, many months consecutively. But I value all your support. So thank you again, Marvin.
I don't know if you want to talk about like Matt Gaetz, or there was a comment about one of the YouTubers being targeted by like a publication for having a criminal record. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No. I mean, look, with Matt Gaetz, the new update is...
LA Times. The LA Times. Okay, never mind. LA Times just did a hit piece on YouTuber Bo of the Fifth Column for being a former convicted felon. He's a known outspoken liberal-leaning de-radicalizer. What's your opinion on YouTubers being deplatformed?
I mean, look, my interactions with Bo have been nothing short of really nice. Bo is seems to be a very nice guy. He's not necessarily on the left, and I'm not using that as an insult, but he's certainly not on the right. And on some issues, he definitely probably does lean left. But you're right. What calling him a de-radicalizer is a great term, because there are some people on like the YouTube left who exist as the gateway point. They're not necessarily going to be the person that has the cutting edge positions. They're not going to be the most left wing. They're not necessarily going to be the most combative with conservatives, but they are sort of there to be like, here's somebody, if you got like an independent friend or somebody that maybe voted for Trump, but now they're having second thoughts.
They're a good introduction to like left-leaning principles.
Yeah, you know how there's like the right-wing rabbit hole? Like there's the right-wing rabbit hole where maybe you'll see like a Fox News clip, and then you'll get into like Ben Shapiro or Dave Rubin, and then you'll eventually find yourself with like the truly heinous stuff like Crowder and all the rest, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Well, I'd like to say that in some ways we have people like that on our side, except it starts decent and it gets better and better and better as you go down the left-wing rabbit hole, for lack of a better term, and I'm not conflating the two. I haven't read this report. I've heard some discussions about this. The Surfs and Mike from PA, they're two Twitch streamers, had a discussion about this. Honestly, I don't want to comment too much further until I've had time to like read about it and know about this. But all I'll say is that from my experience, Bo has been very nice. He's reached out to me before to talk to congratulate me. I had when one of my videos hit a particular milestone, he reached out and sent me a message congratulating me. He's let it be known he's watched a bit of my content. I'm not a regular viewer of his, but I'll watch a video every now and then.
Well, and just like pointing out that someone has a criminal record or maybe a convicted felon and therefore they're not worth listening to is a ridiculous sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, if that's all it is, if all it is that at some point in his life he did something wrong, then I don't care. Like, I believe in redemption. Like, I've talked about it on this channel, how, like, I was furious at all the other Democrats during the primary because a lot of them were like, I don't think that once you're out of jail, you should be able to vote, or you should have to serve your whole probation. When I was like, I'm with Bernie, and Bernie's like, no one should ever lose any fundamental right like voting, even if you're incarcerated, right? Like, even if, which is what we have here in Canada, even our worst people can vote in like the worst criminals can vote in Canada, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And so I think this idea that like you do something wrong, whether you serve time or fine, probation, whatever mixture, and then you do all of that,
and then you fundamentally lose your value.
Yeah, it's like, well, what's the point then? The whole point is that you do your time, and then like, that's the punishment. And probation after or whatever. And so, yeah, I don't know. I have to read more into this. Again, the Serfs and Mike from PA, go to the Serfs Times page and check that out, because they had like a 2-hour discussion on this where I think they go into some of these details, and that might be a better entry point than me just rambling. But I do like Bo from my interactions. And again, I want to be careful to say that I have not done enough reading to take like a direct opinion. So I know you guys want like actual answers, but I also want to be respectful. And in terms of general deplatforming, I mean, it depends. I think in general, deplatforming should be avoided when possible, because for a lot of people, including myself, YouTube is basically my livelihood. And so that's a serious thing, right? Like, you don't want people losing their livelihoods, but for a lot of people, like, and because YouTube is, it's not a monopoly in a strict definition, but there's basically no other website where you can really earn an income off making videos in the same way. Like, yeah, you can technically monetize your Facebook videos. Yeah, you can, your smaller websites, whatever, right? But like, YouTube's really the only game in town, right? And so I'm cognizant of that. Then again, I think a lot of people probably deserve some forms of deplatforming when their content is fundamentally hateful and it's fundamentally dishonest, right? And so I think it's trying to find that balance.
For all intents and purposes, is not Bo.
No, well, yeah, and we're not necessarily talking about Bo here, but just in general, like I don't think, for instance, that like, you should be deplatformed for a couple bad videos, but someone like Steven Crowder, who lost his ability to monetize his channel, at least temporarily, I think it's justified, because for months he spread disinformation about the 2020 election, and he's also done awful content, sort of aimed at mocking minorities and all sorts of other people. That's just, for me, beyond the pale. And again, it's not just a one-off thing. It's not just something that he's done here or there. It is the basis of his content. And so with that in mind, I think it's perfectly within YouTube's reasonable approach to deplatform people. Now, another factor with YouTube is, is there a difference between being deplatformed, aka having your channel deleted, or being deplatformed, aka no longer able to make money off your YouTube videos? Because those are different questions in some ways. One is a more fundamental access to speech, whereas the other is YouTube, in effect, is in a business partnership with me. The way it works on YouTube is that, besides what you guys, support me with on Patreon and stuff, basically when YouTube shows you an ad, right? And if you can for me, turn off the ad blockers. But when you get shown an ad on YouTube, based on the company, based on the time of year, based on the video, and based on your age and your gender and all these sorts of things, YouTube will assign a value to that ad. Like however many fractions of a cent that ad was worth. And then YouTube will get 45% of that money, and I will get 55% of that money. And so YouTube, in effect, and I are in a partnership selling our content to these companies. And so it's different to say, ban someone from one of the biggest video sharing sites than say, we no longer want to do a partnership with you, right? And so those are discussions to have. Jordan says hello. Jordan, hey, thanks for the hi, and thanks for stopping by. If you are stopping by, folks, as well, just drop a hello and click the like button. Brings more people to the channel. I think we have a question from Betty's Mush.
We do. So Betty's Mush with the super chat says, "Can I emigrate to Canada yet?"
Well, Betty,
there's a process.
There is a process. I mean, look, just like any other person, if you want to, if you go to if you just Google emigrate to Canada, it's definitely a thing you can do. And if you have all of the certifications to qualify for it, you could maybe emigrate. But in all seriousness, I know a lot of people are saying that, but right now, at least I might wait, because with vaccines and stuff, you guys are way ahead of us. And so Brianna and I, basically no one in our age group, unless you work in healthcare or some other essential industry, is getting their shot. Whereas I've seen Kal Kalinske and other YouTubers, you've seen them on social media share that they've at least gotten their first dose and what have you. So Canada's not perfect, but
we do though have hate speech laws, which make these kinds of conversations a lot more straightforward about what you can and cannot say about people or groups or anything like that. We do
define free speech more narrowly than the U.S. Look, Canada's got a lot of going for it. If you want to move to Canada, that's fine. There's also some challenges about Canada, of course. There is higher costs of living. In many of the cities, cost of living is more expensive. House prices in places like Toronto are truly exorbitant, and it's a major issue. It's a major issue. But so that's something to consider. But the new Matt Gaetz scandal is essentially, it revolves around him going to the Bahamas, right? It's a big deal because in essence, what he's been accused of is going across state lines with a young person, a non-adult, and then having relations with that person, and the relations themselves are not legal, but it's extra super duper not legal when you factor in that you cross borders. Now, the one in question, the one we all heard about, for the past week, was somewhere in the United States. But this particular story, is that he did a trip to the Bahamas, and he met with an entrepreneur who works within the industry to legalize cannabis and things like that. And basically, there are rumors, or there are potentialities, that one of the things he did to get Gaetz alongside him on some of his policies was acquire women for Gaetz, right? That, there's things you can offer a politician to make them support your bills. Some politicians want food, some politicians want wine, some politicians want cash, some politicians want whatever. And some politicians may travel to foreign countries for something more carnal. And so that's what they're saying here. Right now, Gaetz is denying this. He's denying this story. But in essence, they are saying that, he went to the Bahamas, and this Jason Pirozzolo allegedly paid for travel expenses, accommodation, and women. Right? And so, again, I am a believer that sex work is work. Like, I'm a believer in that. I see nothing wrong with that industry existing. Nonetheless, I do think that,
as long as it's regulated, taxed, and unionized.
Yeah, and I do have a problem with congressmen and other powerful people doing things that harm others and that would not be legal for others. I do not like the hypocrisy. And so Gaetz basically now, in addition, is not only accused of doing something, again, even if he didn't cross state lines, is illegal, but he crossed state lines and may have done something similar internationally. Right? Internationally. Right? And so that's the newest, let me just see if there's any new news on this. Right? Because it's sort of a new story here. Let me see, because on Twitter maybe they've broken something on it. Could you give me some water? Sorry, I'm just very thirsty.
Oh my goodness.
Well, no, I have a very dry throat today. Like Nora Donald here on CBS basically said that investigators are scrutinizing a trip he took to the Bahamas with a major entrepreneur and donor. And again, they are worried that some of this trafficking basically took place in the Bahamas. That's what they're worried about. Look, we're not even talking about Nestor anymore, guys. That's what's weird. Before Matt Gaetz's weird thing was Nestor. Again, Nestor is Matt Gaetz's son. That's what Matt Gaetz says. Now, he's not legally adopted. He's not. People are saying Matt Gaetz never adopted him. And the relationship between Gaetz and Nestor is that he is the younger brother of Matt Gaetz's ex-girlfriend. And so a lot of people just assumed that this was all an elaborate ruse to cover up a relationship between Matt Gaetz and Nestor Galban. That's the guy's name. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. We can speculate. But, that's kind of all gone away now. Smokey, how do you feel about all this? For those who don't, Smokey is meowing up a storm. So, we're not even talking about Nestor now. Nestor, no one cares about that. Because, as serious as that is, it's just, that was all rumors. There was never an investigation about Nestor. So, it may be the case that as weird as it is, maybe the Nestor thing is, real. Maybe it's real. Look, weirder things have happened. Maybe they really, maybe Matt Gaetz is a creep and a monster in one way, but he was actually telling the truth about Nestor. We don't know. But no one's talking about Nestor right now. But this is the story. Again, he took this trip, and now investigators who were looking into this original 17-year-old person case, whatever, are looking into the Bahama trips he took in 2018 or early 2019 into this inquiry. So now this has gone international. It's not just that Matt Gaetz did something in the U.S. It's not just that he traveled, say, between Florida and another state with these girls. It's that he may have done something similar internationally. Now, the story does not necessarily specify if the women in the Bahamas were of age or not. It doesn't specify either way, but the simple act of it, regardless of age, would make it illegal, but likely less illegal, I suppose, if they were women and not children, right? And so that's, well, I mean, the Nestor story could be illegal if what people's rumors are saying are true, that before Nestor became an adult, he had a relation with Matt Gaetz, in which case it likely would be. But again, that's pure speculation. And there's a real deal investigation. We're not talking rumors here. Like, he's being investigated by, like, the Department of Justice. And it was an investigation started under Donald Trump and Bill Barr. It's not like Joe Biden came into power, right? And went to Merrick Garland and said to Merrick Garland, hey, Merrick, let's get Matt Gaetz. Let's get Gaetz. And Merrick's like, okay, let's do it, bro. Like, no, that's not how it happened. Like, what happened was, likely, this is a very real story with very real facts involved. And it was likely brought to Bill Barr directly because it involves a congressman. And Bill Barr likely saw the evidence and said, we have to look more into this. Maybe he's not guilty, but this merits investigation. And again, because he's a sitting congressman and all that, it's probably not open and shut, and it's going to take time. And Trump's term ended, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the investigation ended, right? Like, there's still more to look at. Right, like, yeah, exactly, Louis said it is basically, like, as Louis says, it's going to be a heavy charge. Look, he was already, I made a video on this a couple nights ago. Go check out my videos on this after, but basically, on what we knew even just a couple days ago, he was already facing potential life. Like, if he was convicted on what he was alleged to have done with the 17-year-old, that carries a potential life sentence. Now, of course, innocent until proven guilty, and of course, the potential for a life sentence does not equal a guarantee of one. But, like, this is not, if worst case scenario,
probation,
he gets like what Mike the Situation Sorrentino got from the Jersey Shore for tax evasion, and he goes away for 8 months at a minimum security prison. No, this is like you go for the rest of your life. And Matt Gaetz is like not even 40 yet. He's in his late 30s, right? He's only a few years older than Brianna and I and many of you watching, and he's got over half of his life left, right? This is a big deal. It's a massive deal. And you can see why, and I've talked about this, you can see why a lot of Republicans have been reluctant to defend him and to talk about this case, right? Because it fundamentally is just so hairy. It's just so absolutely hairy right now to talk about this case. You have something very serious, extremely serious, being alleged. Something extremely serious. This is why Donald Trump, basically all he said so far is Gaetz maintains his innocence, and I never had a conversation with him about a pardon. Now, I think Trump might be lying there, or at the very least, he's massaging the truth, because he might have had a discussion with someone about Gaetz' request for a pardon, which is sort of like, that's how it often happened, right? Trump, like, people would ask people, close to Trump, hey, can you put a good word in for me for a pardon? And, maybe they never talked to Trump about it, so Trump can say, Gaetz and I never talked about it without technically lying, maybe. Although, that's not necessarily true, because in some other instances, spokespeople for Gaetz have basically admitted that he's spoken to Trump about this, if only informally. I don't know if there was like a formal sit-down meeting where the agenda was about this specific issue, or if it was more just like casually mentioned, in just a passing by conversation. These are all, quibbles, right? But the point is, no one wants to be in on this.
Are we finished on this topic? Can I talk about something else?
Yeah, if you want to just...
Yeah, I want to talk about my thing.
Well, just one more thing, though. And I mean, I think, like, what's crazy about this is that he hasn't seemingly, like, lawyered up and done all the things you're supposed to do in these instances, right? Like, it really is baffling in a way, because you have this guy who, for lack of a better term, is being accused of, again, something that puts you away forever, and he went on Tucker Like, we talked about this. He went on Tucker Carlson. So let's follow the story again. Quick timeline. Story breaks last Tuesday, I believe. Last Tuesday, the story breaks. Right? I remember this because we were at the park. We had a really nice picnic with Demetrios. It was fun. It was a nice picnic. It was the first day where it was like, maybe it was just warm enough that we could like eat in our coats and have a nice picnic. Yeah. It was nice. And so, came home, read the story, all of that. And then I find out he's going to be on Tucker that night. And Tucker tries to give him a softball interview, and all he does is make himself look bad and make Tucker look bad too. But it's like, why would you do that? You've been accused of something incredibly, incredibly serious, and it's from the DOJ, who don't play around. It was started under Trump and Barr, so you can't even say, like, from a tactical perspective, this is a Democratic witch hunt against you, right? Like, you know, like, I don't even think Joe Biden knows who Matt Gaetz is. I would be surprised if Joe Biden knows who Matt Gaetz is. I really would. I really would. And so it's just clearly not about that. And he goes on TV. He's a lawyer. He should know what you do in that case is you never go in front of the media unless you've been coached exactly on what to say and how to say it.
You should probably just not go in front of the media.
Or not go in front of the media. Or have a lawyer go on your behalf. Have a representative there with you. Something. Right? And he's still been on Twitter, and he wrote an article for the Examiner, sort of like a right-wing, like, it's like the Washington Examiner, it's like a right-wing newspaper, just like off the walls, crazy stuff, and like, you know, he needs to just follow the advice that he likely learned on day one of law school, and like, there's a former Republican politician here, Doug Jolly, what's his name here? David Jolly, who is a former Republican congressman from Florida, but no longer identifies as a Republican. He's a former Republican, but when he was in office, he was a Republican, and he said what Gaetz needs to do is shut up, hire a lawyer, and resign. And at the very least, he needs to do those two things.
3 things.
Yeah.
Shut up, hire a lawyer, and resign.
Well, yeah, but he needs to do at least the first 2, right? Because, like, you need to, like, look, if you honestly feel you are innocent in all these things, you still gotta, like, not be an idiot about it, right? So you need to just go away for a little bit and just talk with your lawyers, all of those things, figure it out, and then, like, whatever, right? Like, you need to do that. You need to do that. You haven't been doing that. And that really creates this scenario here. Now, in terms of resigning, I mean, technically, he doesn't need to necessarily resign yet, although that might not be a decision he gets to make, because there are rumors that he'll be expelled upon indictment, given how serious the charges are against him. But I think that if he basically just needs to go away. He just needs to go away. Well, that's the thing, and I made a video on this. Generally, the way it works in a case like this, and there hasn't necessarily been a case like this where somebody's been accused of something this heinous like Gaetz, at least not in recent years. But generally what happens is when a congressperson faces like a potential indictment or something, before indictment, there's usually no consequences, right? They haven't been charged with anything, so even if everyone kind of thinks and knows they're a scumbag, they're also technically innocent, blah, 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 blah. So, nothing happens. Usually upon indictment, what happens is that they are asked to step down from all their positions of power. Mm-hmm. If they hold a party position of power, or they're asked to step down. And if they sit on everybody in Congress sits on committees, except for Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she got removed from her committees. But, you know, if you sit on, say, the Energy Committee, you'll be asked to resign from your committee spots. You'll be asked to resign from all your committee spots, at least temporarily, to basically say that in the interest of investigations, while I am under investigation, maybe people are skeptical of me. So while I am still duly elected by the people, I'm going to shelve my power for now.
Okay, well, you can pick this up in a minute.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about something, and I know this is a little bit unusual because I just normally back Christo up, but for any of the Canadian viewers here are members of the NDP, so we know that the NDP federal convention is coming up here starting on Friday. And as it's, been well known on this channel, I'm a member of the United Steelworkers and a member of the NDP. And I want to put in an endorsement for one of my brothers, DJ Coley, who is going to be running for the position of party president. Thanks, Christo. Does that even look good?
I don't know.
For the position of party president. So I'm going to drop okay, I don't know if I can do this, but okay, I think I just put the link to DJ's campaign in the chat. So I know DJ personally. We've been at least acquaintances, but friends for the last couple of years. DJ, I first met him when he worked for the Ontario NDP. He's been a grassroots organizer. He now works for the United Steelworkers in our communications department. He is a really awesome candidate. He has the right skills for the position of party president. And I just wanted to put his link there. As well as, put in my plug for DJ. He's an amazing candidate. And I would just encourage anyone who hasn't taken a look at his platform to go and take a look. And then for anyone who is going to the NDP convention, I don't know exactly how the messaging or how it's going to work. But if you see me, say hi, because I would love to see some of you guys there. I know it's not going to be, the typical weekend that we would normally have, but at least we can still have some fun. So DJ has his Facebook presence, he has his Twitter, and he has the link to the platform that I just dropped there. So I just want to encourage you guys to really consider voting for DJ. And that's really it.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. DJ is a great guy. But look, I mean, people are saying cover the convention. Bree's getting a lot of great comments there. I'll likely be writing at least a couple more articles on the convention for Canadian Dimension, a left-wing publication. In addition, Andy and I are recording our Left Turn Canada episode tomorrow, and the convention will be one of the things we talk about. Maybe some of the resolutions, what's at stake, those sorts of things.
I did my resolution prioritization tonight. Today was the last day you could do it by midnight, guys, if you haven't done it already. Yeah,
if you're a delegate to convention, you can vote on the prioritization of resolutions, which is important because there's not enough time to talk about them all.
Midnight Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, 11:59 p.m. Eastern, aka in about 3 hours.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's it. I'm going to go.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you. Talk to you later.
Thank you so much. We just got a super chat from David Molina. David, thank you so much for that. I don't see a question. If you do have a question or comment, be sure to let me know, and I'll do my best to catch it. But thank you so much for the support. But no, I mean, look, he really does need to just shut the hell up. He needs to shut the hell up. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking, honestly. Look, as much as a lot of us in my community in the Christo Aivalis channel community aren't really necessarily Matt Gaetz fans, and so we're not going to be all concerned about him and all of this and that. Fundamentally, it's you think, okay, just from a legal perspective, you need to this dude needs to shut up. He 100% needs to shut up. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the Republican Party and disenfranchisement, because it is incredibly troubling what we've been seeing. It's been incredibly troubling. The Republican Party is going increasingly mask off in their war on democracy. Right? Right? An incredibly mask-off war about ending democracy. We've talked about it on this channel. We talked about it last week with the Georgia thing. Basically, Republicans know, and it's only getting worse for them, that they cannot win a majority. They cannot win a majority. Again, since 1989, like since George Bush Sr. won in 88, leave that election out. So since that election, the Republicans have won the presidential popular vote one time. Right? One time. And so, when push comes to shove, they have quickly realized that there's two paths here. There is, you can change how you appeal to the people, change your policies, change your messaging, whatever, or you can just double and triple and quadruple and quintuple down on disenfranchisement. And that's what they're doing, right? They're very much saying it through gerrymandering, through disenfranchisement, through all of these sorts of things, we can just rule with 45% of the country voting for us. Right? That's what they're trying to do. And so you're seeing it through things like the Georgia law. But more than that now, you're seeing conservative sources make the argument that voter turnout isn't good. This is a relatively new development in terms of rhetoric. Now, I'm not suggesting that Republicans 10, 15 years ago actually wanted higher turnout. They didn't. They knew back then as well that high turnout means young people and poor people and marginalized people are voting, and that generally means Democrats win. Generally. Not always, but generally. Right? If every person voted, if every eligible voter voted in every election, that would be more victories for the Democrats. Right? 100%. 100%. And so, Republicans, though, still tied into the idea that they wanted everyone to vote, and, voting is good, and every American should cast their ballot, and all of these things. They at least paid lip service. But more and more now, you're actually seeing conservatives make the blatant case that it's time to ask if quality of voter matters more than quantity of voter. And that is terrifying, guys. Absolutely terrifying. We see Leslie Wheeler with the superhero pair with the headband flying through the sky. Leslie, thank you so much for your support. It's very much appreciated as always. Thank you. So basically, this article was in the National Review. Now, the National Review is a right-wing source. It's not necessarily a moderate source, but in essence, what this does is make the argument that actually we need fewer voters. We need fewer voters, not more voters. So I want to kind of go through this with you because it's important, right? This story's gotten a lot of traction, mostly negative, but this is a good distillation for what conservatives believe. And they are saying it more and more frequently now. That's the thing. Conservatives are saying this stuff out loud. Before they weren't. They really weren't. Before this era, you would be hard-pressed to find a lot of mainstream conservatives making open arguments to disenfranchise the people. Right? 100%. You'd find it very difficult to find people making that argument. So, right now, you're seeing a little bit of it. Right? You're seeing a little bit of it at this moment, but nothing crazy. And so, for example, or back in the day, you might see, for instance, someone like Ann Coulter. And Coulter used to, well, it's the top story, I think, in part because people like myself read it and then shared it saying, holy crap, look at this, right? And so, Ann Coulter used to say that women should be disenfranchised. She used to say that if women didn't vote, Republicans would win more, and I want Republicans to win more. So if we stopped women from voting, then we would have a better country. But that was always a fringe argument. That was a fringe thing she said. And it was shocking to hear it. Now, the argument that too many people are voting is mainstream. Look, a few weeks ago, a legislator from Arizona made the clear argument that one of the issues is that we're too worried about quantity of voters, we're too worried about how many voters we have, and we're less worried about the quality of voter. And so you can see what he's saying there, that all of these things to make voting easier and more accessible are sacrificing the quality of voter. Right? That's the argument. And that's very scary because effectively what they're implying is that while every ballot in the box counts for one vote, it's not necessarily the case that all those voters are equal. And so we need to find a way to ensure that the quality voters get to vote. Not the quantity voters, the quality voters. And then you can really get a sense there, right? You really get a sense. And that's what's happening here, right? That's what's happening here, at least in part. And so if you look at this article, this really does give you some of the arguments. And it's in a very clear, fashion that they're doing it, right? Let's take a read. Much of the discussion about proposed changes to voting laws, backed by many Republicans and generally opposed by Democrats, begs the question and simply asserts that having more people is, ceteris paribus, that means all things being equal and whatnot, a good thing. Why should we believe that? So right off the top, he is challenging the idea that high voter turnout equals good. He's not making the argument that Donald Trump made. He is not making the argument that Rudy Giuliani made and that Sidney Powell and all these ghouls made, which is that every legal vote should count. What this guy is saying is that not all legal votes should be cast. Why shouldn't we believe the opposite? That the republic would be better served by having fewer but better voters. Now, of course, what he could be referring to there, ironically, is the founding of the United States, where at the very beginning of the country, there were millions of people that lived in the country, but over half of them couldn't vote. Every woman effectively couldn't vote. Almost every black person outside of a few states couldn't vote, right? In many states, not all of them, but in many states, you needed to have property to vote. So if you were not a propertied white man in most states, above 21, I believe was the age, so not even 18, you could not vote. And so the vast majority of people were disenfranchised. And that doesn't even include indigenous people and some other groups as well, right? So that's right off the top there. Now he says many Americans, being devout egalitarians, recoil from the very notion of better voters as a matter of rhetoric, even as they accept qualifications as a matter of fact, right? Now he says we disenfranchise felons as by the default with reenfranchisement on a case-by-case basis. It is likely that under such a practice, some people who ought to be considered rehabilitated would be unjustly excluded, but all eligibility requirements risk excluding somebody who might make a good voter or a better voter than someone who is eligible. There are plenty of smart and responsible 16-year-olds who would make better voters than their dim and irresponsible older siblings and parents. He's right about that. But he doesn't say we shouldn't have, but basically what he's saying here is, while there are edge cases, in general, it is just to exclude people from voting based on category, even if as individuals, they may be decent voters. So what he's saying here, he's already acknowledging. He acknowledges that many felons should have the right to vote, but don't. And he acknowledges that many 16-year-olds are just as qualified as their parents or their 20-something brother or sister or cousin, but not necessarily have the right to vote. He hints it here. I would raise the voting age to 30. It means that categorical decision making by its nature does not account for certain individual differences. So you can see what he's doing here, right? He's trying to say that we already disenfranchise felons. In most states, felons are disenfranchised. And you can get your voting rights back in certain cases in certain ways. But effectively what he's doing then is making the argument that, because we do this to felons, we could do this to any other group. And look, I've been very clear on my own that I don't support people losing their right to vote. If you are on death row, you should be able to vote. If your execution is scheduled for the second week of November, you should be able to vote in early November, knowing that you're going to get executed 5 days later, a day later, 1 hour later. That is your right to vote universally, no exceptions. Yes, even the goddamn Boston bomber. And I always say that not to be purposely inflammatory, but because that's when they remember how they tried to make Bernie look evil during the primaries when they say, hey, would you give felons the right or prisoners the right to vote? And Bernie's like, yeah. Is it even the Boston bomber? And Bernie was basically like, yeah, let that MFer vote. I don't like him. He belongs in prison, but don't let him, but let him vote. It's his right. It's inalienable in my view. And so, but I think even a reasonable person could say there's a difference between taking criminals and taking their vote away temporarily and versus making it harder for everyone to vote simply based off some sort of categorization. So it's one thing to say, hey, maybe felons shouldn't be able to vote. I disagree, but you could make an argument because it's based on some sort of action versus, hey, we should take away the right to vote from poor people who can't get access to IDs. One is discrimination and one is a policy that is based on some sort of earned criteria. So kind of just following up here then, you have this continuing where he goes on to say, where is that? Yeah. Similarly, asking for government-issued photo IDs at the polls seems to me obviously the right thing to do, even if it was result in some otherwise eligible voters not voting. I'm not convinced that having more voters is a good thing in any case, but even if it were, it would not be the only good, but only one good competing with other goods, one of which is seeing to it that the eligibility rules on the books are enforced so that elections can be honestly and credibly regulated. Again, we talked about this last week. The issue isn't the ID in and of itself. The issue is access to those IDs are not equitable. Again, we had a troll in the chat. Maybe they were being good faith, but I really doubt it. But we had a troll in the chat last week. Many of you who were here will remember that, where basically what they said was, why does it matter that voter IDs are required? Everyone can get them. Anyone can get a driver's license or an ID card. It's not like they're super hard to get. But one, they still cost money. They cost time, all of these things. But we talked about this. When Alabama, a few years ago, back, I think it was 2014, 2015, when Alabama tightened their voter restrictions, right? They made it harder to vote. And they made ID requirements more stringent, that you needed a certain type of ID, like a photo ID. The most common form of photo ID most Americans and Canadians have is a driver's license. It's not the only one, but it's the most common one. And so the discussion, so what happened as soon as that voter law passed in Alabama, they closed DMVs in black communities. In every black majority county, they closed a DMV. So in a lot of places where black people lived and other poor people lived, they lost their DMV, meaning it now became that much harder to get to the place to get the thing you needed to vote. And so effectively what he's implying here in some ways is that if you can't get an ID card, maybe you're not smart enough, quote unquote, to vote, or it's not too much to ask. And what I say is, if you honestly believe that, if you believe it's about integrity and security, then everyone should have a card mailed to them. Everyone should have ID given to them months before the election, right? Universally, at no cost at all, not even $1 to the individual. None. No cost. If you want everyone to have ID, then the ID must be state provided to everyone on an equitable basis. Right? Because basically what he's saying here, we could verify eligibility at the polls easily just as we want to. Basically, we expect people, including poor and struggling people, to pay their taxes. Why shouldn't we also expect them to keep their driver's licenses up to date? If voting really is a sacred duty, we're always being told it is, shouldn't we treat it at least as seriously as filing a 1040 EZ? But the thing about taxes is they already have your info. Taxes are only made hard because of corporate bullshit, right? We know this, right? There's been a whole bunch of coverage on this. You guys have seen this, right? Where the reason, unless you have a certain kind of business, or you have a lot of investments, or you have a lot of complicated deductible, right? Right? The government knows how much you made. The government knows all of that. They could just do your taxes for you. For a majority of people. Again, if you have a small business, you might have to do your taxes. The government might not have all the info on you. All these sorts of things. But for a lot of people, the government has every piece of info it needs to auto do your taxes. They just choose not to do it because it helps corporations. And so likewise here, what he's saying is, you just got to get a driver's license. But again, the government knows people for the most part. And if it just sent everyone a goddamn ID, people would be better off. There would be more voters if we made it easier to vote, and there would be more doctors if we didn't require a license to practice medicine. Again, voting is a goddamn inalienable right. It is a right. It's a right. Being able to practice medicine is not a right. You have to have, even leaving money aside, in an egalitarian society where there is no tuition. Bernie won and there was no more tuition. You would still need to get into med school. There'd only be so many spots, and you need to be able to pass the MCAT and do well on it, and you would need to be able to do all the things you need and have to become a doctor. Voting is not that. In essence, what he's hinting at here is the return of the poll test. There used to be, back in the day, a test you would have to take before you could vote. Now, you only had to take the test if none of your grandparents or parents voted. So in effect, it was used to disenfranchise black people and not long-standing white people. So white immigrants and black people were often disenfranchised, as well as other minorities. But in effect, what he's saying is, we require tests if you want to be a doctor, and because voting's really important, maybe we should have tests to vote. The fact that we believe unqualified doctors to be a public menace, but act as though unqualified voters were just stars in the splendid constellation of democracy, indicates how little real esteem we actually have for the vote, in spite of our public pieties. But who defines qualification? Right? Who defines qualification? Right? You could see this. Only qualified voters should vote. Only qualified voters should vote, guys. And of course, like, he's not going to tip his hat too directly, because he's already mask off, but he doesn't want to necessarily go fully mask off, right? Like, he's not necessarily going to come out and say directly, you must own property, you must have a degree, you must have a job, you must, X, Y, Z, and on and on and on. He's not going to come out and necessarily say things like that, because he knows that gives up the game a bit too easily. But he comes close to that. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this bullshit here. One argument for encouraging bigger turnout is that if more eligible voters go to the polls, then the outcome will be more closely reflective of what the average American voter wants. That sounds like a wonderful thing if you haven't met the average American voter. So you can see here, it's just this absolute disdain for the people, right? And again, you have to take the context here. He's not mentioning a race. He's not. For all you know, reading this just without context is that, he just hates all low information voters. White, black, indigenous, whatever. But that's not true, is it? What we talk about when turnout increases is generally, not exclusively, but generally, it means turnout among marginalized groups. And so the fact that those marginalized groups get out and vote to better reflect the will of the country is bad for him. He said voters can be wrong, voters can be driven by bigotry and spite, but that's true. But in a democracy like in the US and in Canada, you balance the rights of the majority with the rights of minorities. That's how constitutional democracies work. You have the United States have a democracy where every person that has the ability to vote gets to vote, but then you say that certain rights are protected. So, every person gets to vote, but just because every person gets to vote, it doesn't mean that you can go out and ban a religion. So you can't have democracy ban people's human rights as individuals, right? So the minority is protected. This is a way of him as maybe nodding to the left, being like, look, I'm not just criticizing the left. I want to stop low information conservatives from stealing liberal rights. But it doesn't work like that. Well, and he tells on himself here, because he says, they took things like freedom of speech, religion, etc. off the voters' table entirely. Exactly, he's admitting that. Like, he's admitting that voters can get things wrong, and voters can be driven by bigotry and intolerance and prejudice. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why certain rights are not subject to day-to-day democracy. And it's another reason why, and this is a debate we can have, because not everyone agrees, this is a reason why some people think, well, you elect politicians on very broad ideas, but the specific implementation isn't necessarily done on a vote. You don't necessarily vote on the specific action of every, public servant. We don't get to vote on what the curriculum is in every school district, every day, all the time. Right? Like we don't get to necessarily vote on which color pen they use at an office building in Washington. decisions are delegated and voters are voting on very broad ideas. Well, first of all, he's lying here. He's like, here, like, we would hate that these democracy here because tax hikes would not fly. Tax hikes on the wealthy are incredibly popular. So, I mean, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but basically, what he's trying to say is that democracy is overrated, but also that, like, we need to stop regular people from voting. Well, and this is a good point, and this is what Brianna was saying earlier, U Camino or Zero O Camino. Let me know if I said that right. That these people, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the people writing these articles are never the ones that would be at risk of being disenfranchised. This guy, if we look him up here, Kevin D. Williamson is a... Kevin D. Williamson is I believe he's a white man. Certainly of like an Anglo-Saxon name. He is a fellow at the National Review, a roving correspondent for the National Review. He's got a big article. He's written books. If I look him up here, Kevin D. Williamson is a conservative writer. He's in his 40s, so he's old enough to vote. I'm trying to see, does he have a university degree? Yes, he's taught at George Mason. He's taught at the King's College in New York City. This guy would, under any definition, have the right to vote based on education, probably based on income, property, things like that. Claude says this is one of the best channels. Thank you so much, Claude. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. If you guys think this is the best channel, leave a comment saying best channel. And if it's not the best channel, then leave a comment saying that it's the best channel and humor me. Also, drop a like button and share it with your friends, as a lot of progressive creators have been saying recently. And it's not just me, it's a lot of people. I don't know if it's algorithmic. I think it might be partially algorithmic. It might be based on a lower interest in politics. But while my views have picked up a little bit in the last few days, they're a little bit better than they were during the dip like last month. The fact of the matter is, my content is way less likely to be shown to new people. And this is a broader trend a lot of people have been noticing. Kyle Kalinske, Status Quo, a lot of us have had our content being showed far less likely to new people. So one of the things you can do to help my channel and other channels is, like, when you like a video of mine or another creator like mine, not just me, of course, consider sharing those videos with like friends and family that might like it, because it does help us. It helps us get the message out there to folks, because right now, YouTube is not giving our content necessarily a massive organic push. And that's sort of hamstringing us, if only a little bit right now, right? So that's something that you can do to maybe help channels like this. Jason Kennedy, thank you so much for the typical black cat. I very much appreciate it. I don't know if George Mason is a right-wing school, I'm not sure. But it's like, it's a school I've definitely heard of. So this guy is well-educated. He fits the criterion of who would be able to vote and things like that. So that's one thing to consider. Look, like, look, this is not just about specific infighting on the left or anything like that, but like, specifically, I'm just saying, like, left channels of all sorts of varieties have been seeing a real decline in subscriber gain after the election. Again, I don't know if it's because YouTube has changed the algorithm or it's because unless you're already a viewer of somebody, you're not really super into politics right now. I get it. But like, that's something that's affecting a lot of channels. Claude, thank you so much for the follow-up. Always look forward to your content. Claude, thank you so much for the support and for the kind words. I was going to say something. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Republicans just going absolutely crazy with their approach to opposing Biden. Because again, I keep going back to this. There are many things to criticize Joe Biden on, right? There are many things. There's still no $15 minimum wage. The $2,000 checks could have been $14. The situation at the border is horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. It's not all Biden's fault, but it's horrendous. It's a humanitarian disaster. There's tons to criticize him on. But Republicans, for the most part, are either criticizing Biden for things that Donald Trump did and did worse, or for bullshit, like Dr. Seuss and things like that. And Marsha Blackburn is at it again. You remember our friend Marsha. A couple weeks ago, we talked about Marsha coming on and basically saying, yeah, I should look at Twitch more. Either do a simulcast or do some content for Twitch. It is something that I should certainly look into. The audiences are distinct in a lot of ways, so I wonder if I would produce specific content for each. But, well, yes, Biden did push imperialism for a long time, and as a long-time operative in American politics, he bears a large responsibility, don't get me wrong. My point is to say there's plenty to criticize Biden on, even if nothing is 100% his fault. But look at what Republicans are doing. A few weeks ago, Marsha Blackburn was trying to suggest that the stimulus bill was full of waste, but she created a list of things she thought were wasteful, and it was less than 1% of the whole package. So the list she made of wasteful things, right? The list she made was a very, very narrow slice of the bill. And that means that even under Republican attack ads, 99% of the stimulus bill was deemed worthwhile, right? So it was kind of an own goal. And she's sort of doing it again here, where she's going through Biden's, she says, infrastructure proposal is the latest attempt to push through a liberal agenda. Take a look at what Biden wants taxpayer dollars going towards. And so the Republican strategy with this infrastructure bill that they know is necessary, but they're not going to vote for it, is to say that we like infrastructure, but this bill has non-infrastructure things in it we can't support. And so that's going to be the strategy. 100%. 100% that's going to be the strategy. Right? 100% that's going to be the strategy. They're going to be like, we don't need this, we don't need this ridiculous, bill. It's full of pork barreling and stuff. But this is all good stuff. The problem with Biden's infrastructure bill is it's too small. AOC has said it. Even Joe Manchin proposed a bigger bill. Manchin wanted $4 million. Biden's is only, or $4 trillion. Biden's only 2 to 3. So it says here, $35 billion in climate change studies. Apparently, the Biden bill includes investments in climate change studies. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think that climate change is affecting infrastructure. Right? I think climate change is affecting infrastructure. If you think of all the sorts of things that can affect roads and rail and power lines and all these sorts of things, climate change is a big factor. And so if you're planning the infrastructural future of a massive country like the United States, and climate change is happening, and it's happening harder, and it's happening faster than it ever has before in the history of modern humanity, at the very least, if not in the entire history of humanity, then you're going to need to study it. Because what if it turns out that the way we build roads is not going to be effective in 20 years because of climate change? And spending $35 billion now saves you $350 billion 20 years from now. Right? Like, this is just like, look, she's saying this is not infrastructure. This is like putting their priorities over American priorities. Green transportation is popular, and green transportation is necessary, and this isn't necessarily at the expense of non-green transportation, but it's to help kickstart green transportation. Now, I don't think that's enough, frankly. Again, as AOC noted, Biden's package shouldn't just be $2 trillion or so. It should be $10 trillion over 10 years. You got to go big. You got to go big. 10. Bernie wanted 16, right? Bernie wanted 16 trillion for his package. Bernie would have fundamentally transformed America. I mean, it would have been hard to pass that through Congress, let's be real. But that would have been his objective. Now, green transportation is 100% infrastructure. She also goes here and says, this one in particular, that there's money in the bill for elder care. Now, this might not look like infrastructure, but when you're looking at bringing care to people, you're connecting people. What does infrastructure do? It connects people and companies and industries and resources to one another. And bringing elder care directly to elders in some cases and doing all sorts of these things is part of a social infrastructure. Right? 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 Like the social infrastructure. And so I definitely think that it is really clear Republicans are going to do what they did with the stimulus. They know the bill is going to be popular. They're going to vote against it. They're going to try to suggest that the bill isn't actually stimulus, or that one wasn't stimulus, this one is an infrastructure. And then watch. Watch, because this is going to happen. When the bill gets passed and Marsha Blackburn finds out that one of these projects is in Knoxville, Tennessee, she is going to tout it. She's going to be like, look at all this money flowing into Knoxville. Aren't I a great senator? Look at all this money you got here in Knoxville. And it's going to be exactly like the stimulus package, where Madison Cawthorn and Roger Wicker and other Republicans trashed the bill when it was up for a vote, and they trashed it on social media. And then after it passed, when one of their communities benefited, they highlighted the benefit on social media like they had something to goddamn do with it. Well, I mean, look, infrastructure should be defined very broadly, right? It should be defined very broadly. Kristi Noem, she went on Fox like last week, the week before, and basically said like, oh, this bill isn't about infrastructure. She's like, it includes water pipes and things like that. Like, infrastructure is not literally just roads. Like, Republicans want you to think, because it's like part of the oil cult, that the only thing that is infrastructure are roads for fossil fuel cars, and literally nothing else is infrastructure. They want you to think that, right? They want you to think that everything except for that is some kind of pork barreling, right? But broadband is infrastructure. Rail is infrastructure. Water pipes are infrastructure, right? These are infrastructural investments, right? 100%. Like, good, like, I hate having to defend Pete Buttigieg, but he had to basically go on Fox News and explain to Fox that, like, hey guys, water needs to be shipped places. You need to get the water from a water source. You need to clean the water. You know, you need to filter the water. You need to get the water to local communities, and then it needs to get to individual homes and schools and businesses and all of those sorts of things, and industrial implements. And then that water, once it's been used, has to be pumped out and then, you know, put through treatment plants again when possible to use the water again. All of that is infrastructure. Well, exactly. Roads are from Christo to Christo again. Christo is here. Great to see you again, Christo. Great for stopping by. Thanks so much. Well, look, I'm not a fan of Pete Buttigieg. I think making him transportation secretary was not necessarily Biden's best pick, personally. I'm not necessarily a roaring fan of Buttigieg as infrastructure secretary, if I'm being honest. But I do think that one thing Buttigieg does have a certain talent for is, like, mocking conservatives pretty effectively. And so he did a good job there. But, like, yeah, they are definitely sold on this argument. They are definitely sold on this argument that it's only infrastructure if it's for cars that burn gasoline. If not, it's not infrastructure. Right? Now, I did want to talk a little bit about AOC. I did want to talk a little bit about it. Now, I want to play you a video in a second. I'm going to get it queued up. Because I do think that there are legitimate criticisms of AOC. But I think that people have been far too quick to jump on, like, the door type train, which is not only that AOC is making mistakes, but that AOC is a villain. And I don't agree with that. Now, I definitely think there's a lot of things to be said. My view is that AOC is struggling right now somewhat to balance criticism of Biden with the reality that some things have been getting better and there has been a process of discourse in the Democratic Party that did not exist under Obama. And I think she's finding it hard to strike that balance. Now, that's not necessarily saying she should be let off the hook, but that is to say that I don't think she's selling people out. I think AOC is struggling a little bit. I think a lot of progressives are. I think Bernie is even a little bit. Even Bernie's struggling a little bit with how to balance being a part of the government. Bernie especially with the budget committee. He's one of the most important senators with offering good faith criticism. Right? And so I think it's perfectly fair. And as I noted this, I think this is perfectly fair. And I agree to some degree that as of yet, it has not necessarily been the case that the left in the House has flexed muscle enough. Now, there have been some arguments made that the reason Manchin didn't push Biden on stimulus even harder to the right is because behind the scenes, the progressives in the House were pushing back against him. But we didn't see that necessarily, right? Because as I noted earlier, back in 2018, 2019, and 2020, AOC and the Squad and the other progressives were a small group, and the Democrats won so many seats in the midterms, they could pass votes without the Squad. Now, you have a situation where those progressives have the balance of power. Not on every bill, because if there are bills where enough Republicans will vote for it, there will be some, then maybe not. And on bills where only the progressives support it, it wouldn't pass anyway. But they do have that power. I think, for instance, on the next bill that has the ability to include the $15 minimum wage, progressives should say, we will not pass the bill unless it includes the $15 minimum wage. I mean, look, people who are like, we're done with AOC. I think that's really short-sighted, guys. I think that's extremely short-sighted. Like, first of all, it's like, what does that say about the left that we could be done with somebody so quickly? And two, like, who else is there? Like, if you're done with AOC, you have to be done with Bernie too, right? And this is another thing I've noticed. Like, a lot of the things that people are criticizing AOC for, you could also say about Bernie. Remember, Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden, just like AOC did. Bernie Sanders went out and defended the $1,400 checks. When AOC and Bowman and Bush and the rest of the Squad all said it should be $1,400, $2,000 plus the original $6, Bernie went on TV and said the 14 plus the 6 equals 2. Bernie said that, AOC didn't. Bernie was not called a sellout like AOC. Now look, guys, I'm going to be honest. I think some of this, including from the left, is driven by the fact that AOC is a young woman of color. And she's getting more flack because she's racialized. Maybe people aren't making that decision consciously, but I definitely think that's part of it. There's racism and misogyny on the left too. I think that's part of it. Maybe only a small part of it, but it's there. And I definitely think that like, look, who has been a bigger cheerleader of Biden? I think it's Bernie. Bernie, every time he's on TV, he's talking about Biden positively. Every time. And again, Bernie's not lying when he does it, because Bernie is clear that I would do things differently, but like Biden's doing good. And a lot of the left disagrees with him. Right? I don't know. I do think, though, that it is fair to say that they could be doing more. And I think AOC should be more critical of what's happening at the border. 100%. 100%. I didn't necessarily mind that she said that there's a distinction between Biden and Trump. Although I found that the way she did it sounded like she was excusing Biden. And I think she needs to be more deliberate in saying Biden is committing evil actions, even if those actions are less evil than Trump's evil. And I feel like she needs to sharpen at that a little bit. Like, the fact of the matter is, like, people who are like, oh, we're done with AOC, it's just, it seems like it's a bit overkill. Now, look, we can criticize her. Like, listen to this today. And this is something that I think she needs to be stronger on, but a lot of the left in Canada does as well. Like, this is clearly a sign that, that she's not perfect. But listen to this.
Actions do you think can be taken to support movements towards peace, both between Israel...
This is about Israel-Palestine. Now, listen how she says nothing for 2 minutes. Nothing.
Israelis and Palestinians, as well as within the entire region, such as the Abraham Accords.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so You know, earlier just now, you and I were talking about the what and the how.
Yes.
And I think that when we talk about establishing peace, centering people's humanities, protecting people's rights, it's not just about the what and the end goal, which often gets a lot of focus. But I actually think it's much more about the how and the way that we are coming together and how we interpret that what and how we act in the actions that we take to get to that what. And so what this really is about is that it's a question more than anything else about process. And so we really need to make sure that that we are valuing a process where all parties are respected and have a lot of equal opportunity to really make sure that we are negotiating good faith, etc. That being said, I think that there's just this one central issue of settlements, because if the what that has been decided on is to state, then the action of settlements it's not the how to get to that what. And so I think that that's a central thing that we need to make sure that we center, and that we value Jewish and rather we value Israeli, we value the safety and the human rights of Israelis. We value the safety and the human rights of Palestinians in that process that is similar and that on equal footing. And so all of that is extremely important in that process. And
so, I mean, that's not great, right? That's not great. That's not great. Look, the one thing I'll say about that is that I think she's trying to hedge a little bit. And this is a broader problem on the left. We need to be more comfortable saying that it's a fundamental human rights issue and Israel is overwhelmingly the obstacle to a better future. That was very Pete-like, in which you take 2 minutes and you don't say very much. Now, the one thing I will say there is that she does sort of start to suggest that maybe the problem is Israel's illegal settlements. For those that don't understand, there's a whole lot of stuff that Israel does to Palestine that's evil. But one of the biggest things is that even within the already broken system, there are lands for Palestinians and lands for Israelis. And Israel continues to build illegal settlements in territories demarcated for Palestinians, right? And so you're seeing these settlements pop up and it's effectively absorbing Palestinian land. And so she's right in noting that, that those settlements are non-negotiable or should be non-negotiable. Although she doesn't really get there. And I think that this is she's struggling right now. And I don't know if the answer is to fundamentally throw AOC under the bus, because what's going to eventually happen, guys, and we know it, is the next hero is going to face challenges too. Right? Look, if we, Nina Turner. God bless Nina. Did you guys see? Nina raked in a ton of cash. Go check out David Dole. David Dole did a video on that story in particular, where Nina Turner really raked in a bunch of donations. But Nina pulled in the absolute big haul of cash. And I think she's got a great shot at winning that seat in Ohio. It was Marsha Fudge's old seat, and I think she's got a shot at winning it. But Nina's going to face some of these issues. I don't think we should throw these people away. Remember, Nina Turner called Joe Biden half a bowl of shit. She will not do that anymore. Does that make her a sellout? Maybe people like Dora will say yes and others will say yes. I don't know. But if you're going to ask for purity, you will have no one in politics. Bernie doesn't support defunding the police. He doesn't. Bernie wanted to give more money to the cops. Doesn't support defunding the police. I don't know. I still like him. You could be wrong about things, though. Look, they're definitely, if Nina wins, they're definitely going to cancel Nina. 100%. 100% they will cancel her. 100%. Guaranteed. So, I don't know. Like, I think that the left can be stronger. I think that they could be more militant. I really do. I think that's a fair criticism. I think the fairest criticism I've seen is that the left in the House has not used their balance of power yet sufficiently. That is a fair criticism. I don't necessarily think it's fair, though, to instantly say that AOC in particular, or the rest of them in general, are awful and they need to be primaried and we want them all, like, gone forever. I think that's a jump that's unwarranted. Look, my view is that we need to do some form of BDS. Actually, at the NDP convention that Brianna outlined earlier, there is a resolution that I've publicly supported, which would be a partial form of BDS. It would stop if we formed government, the NDP, we would stop weapon sales to Israel, and we would boycott any product coming from an illegal settlement. It's not a full divestment of all Israeli industry, but it's at least acknowledging that the illegal settlements are an Israeli-caused fundamental barrier to justice. Ben Shapeward says with the super chat, thank you so much, Ben. Imagine Andrew Giuliani versus Andrew Cuomo for governor. I mean, look, it might happen. It might happen. I don't know, though. I don't know if Andrew Giuliani's got like a whole bunch of sway. And I kind of think there's a chance that while Cuomo's going to ride out, he's going to ride out the scandal right now. Like Cuomo's going to ride out the awful things he's done, both to those women, but also with the nursing homes. He's going to ride the scandal out, but I sort of think that he's not going to run again. My instinct is he won't resign, but he'll step away. I don't know. I don't think Andrew Cuomo is going to be a good candidate for the GOP in New York. I don't even know if he'll win the nomination. I'm not sure. Right? Oh, like, look, Vaudry, like Bernie's great. Like, we don't have to agree on everything, though. Like, we don't have to agree on everything, right? You know what I mean? So, I mean, look, I think that I don't know what's going to happen with, I'm not a super expert on state politics, even New York, even the bigger states, but I think that Cuomo might step away. He's not going to resign. I think that if he was going to, it was going to be when AOC and Schumer and Gillibrand and everyone came out to ask him to resign. If that didn't knock him out, nothing will. But I think Cuomo has sort of been wounded and is going to have to step away. I definitely think, though, like, we're not done with all this dynastic politics, and that's the thing. I don't know if, like, Andrew Giuliani is going to be the guy, but you damn well know you're going to see Trump's run. I am convinced, guys, that at some point in the future, we are going to get a Chelsea Clinton versus Ivanka Trump election, and it's going to be hell. It's going to be absolute hell. Oh yeah, I don't know if you guys saw this. This was Tom Cotton just sort of casually arguing that the problem with the United States is they don't jail enough people. That the U.S. doesn't put enough people in jail, even though the United States literally jails more people than any other country in the world. And that includes China, who is not only a country that, has, people in jail, but has significantly higher populations. So that is a major factor here. Like, Tom Cotton's a ghoul. The one thing I'll say is that it doesn't, I'd be worried about a President Cotton because I think he's a smart guy who's truly evil. I really believe that. But I think in the polling we've seen, he's not really gaining a lot of traction with Republicans. I think you're far more likely going to see someone like a DeSantis be a 2024 nominee maybe. Or like Ted Cruz or Donald Trump or what have you. Yeah, the U.S. well, let me see. Let's look this up. We're going to look this up, guys. Prison populations. I'm pretty sure it's true in raw terms and per capita. Countries by prison population. Incarceration rate. Now, this is true both in terms of per capita and raw. So the United States has 2 million people in prison. This data, where is it from? Okay. It was last retrieved in February of this year. So it's fairly recent data. The United States has 2 million people in prison right now. Right? The next closest country in terms of raw population is China. China has 1.7 million people in its prisons. Now, of course, you could argue that, do we have full data from all of these countries? Who knows? But the point is that these do not always include people. These do not always include the full amount. So, we're not getting into this debate tonight, guys. We're not doing a Xinjiang debate. But Xinjiang, it does not necessarily include these sorts of camps in there. But with the U.S., it does not necessarily include people in facilities in Samoa, Guam, or the Virgin Territories, or Puerto Rico and the Northern Mariana Islands. It also does not include juvenile detention rates. So, neither the U.S. nor China are necessarily complete there. Right? Well, that's what we are not talking about the Uyghurs thing. No, we're not getting into that debate tonight because that is just every time that happens, it's just a bit of an S-word show, and so we're just not going to be able to talk about that tonight. Maybe that'll have to be like a dedicated stream. But what I will say is that both China and the U.S. have very high amounts of raw people, but don't forget that China has over 1 billion people. But the U.S. only has 300 and some. And so, if you look per capita, you can see that the United States is actually relatively high on the list. It's the highest by quite a bit. El Salvador is number 2 at about 572 people for every 100,000. Right? Whereas China is more in the 100 range. And so some of these countries are very small. Like Palau, for instance, has 94 people in jail, but it's such a tiny country that puts it right here. But the point is, the U.S. really is the prison capital of the world. In both China, in both raw terms and per capita, no one jails like the United States. None. None. And look, I mean, even if you count those camps, I mean, look, like per capita, the U.S. has about 5 times more people than China. So per capita. So even if China's numbers aren't fully accurate, if you doubled the amount of people in Chinese prisons, then they would still be well below the U.S. per capita. You would need to quintuple the amount of people in Chinese prisons to surpass the U.S. Guys, I'm going to wrap up. We normally wrap up between 10 and 10:30. We got to talk about most of what I wanted to talk about tonight, but regardless, we had a lot of fun. There's actually something I kind of wanted to maybe do, but I don't think we're going to have time, but I did want to share it here. It's a fun little list of like left-wing opinions that will get you in trouble with like your friends on the left, and I was hoping we could go through it, but I don't think we're going to have enough time though. Right? I don't think we're going to have enough time. But take a look at some of those because they can be quite interesting. Before I go, I want to share a few things. One, if you haven't yet, do join the Discord. The Discord is a fantastic place in between our live streams to get news about the channel and all those sorts of things. So you can check that out. That's definitely a place to hang out. If you want to support the channel, you can do so via Patreon. You can also do so by becoming a channel member here, or you can make a one-time donation via PayPal. The Patreon link, just as one example, is right here. Oh, I only grabbed partially the link there. Just one second. There we go. One other thing is that if you haven't seen it yet, I have my new Canadian-focused podcast. It is some new content. It's a weekly Canadian podcast. New episodes usually come out Thursday and Friday, or Thursday or Friday, depending on how fast we get them edited. But they're always, Thursday, Friday episodes. You can check that out. Fully free. We have a Patreon for that as well, but the content is fully free, and I want you to check that out. And again, one of the things anyone can do to support the channel, and I've been saying this a lot, is just check out the videos. When you guys watch the videos, it helps the channel. I know a lot of people are tuning out from politics a little bit right now, and I get it, because fundamentally, people are tired, right? People are tired. People are they're drained right now. But with a lot of these channels like ours, it's hard to grow and sustain the channel when most of the audience tunes out. So one thing you can do to support the channel is to check out the videos. Try to check them out every day when you can. It helps me. Click the subscribe button. If you have done that, click the bell and make sure it's on all notifications, and then you'll get notifications when I post my videos. But that's definitely one thing you can do. And as I noted, if you think somebody would like the content, please share it. Those are things you can do to help the channel going forward. So thanks so much, guys. This was great. People are asking if I saw the Tucker Carlson piece on Canada. Yeah, I mean, I did see some of it at least. We might talk a bit about it on the podcast tomorrow, but it's also a busy one, so we might not get to it. Basically, Tucker Carlson called Canada totalitarian because we make people stay in a hotel when they come from another country, which is not unreasonable because Before, when we trusted people to isolate for 14 days, they didn't. And then they came in and spread COVID. So Tucker's overreacting as per usual. Tucker thinks that hotels are a threat and trans kids are a threat, but fascism isn't. So Tucker Carlson can go fuck himself for all I care. So guys, I will see you next week, and have a good one. Videos every day between now and then, of course, but next week 8:30 or 8 p.m. for a new live stream. Thanks again. Yeah, they're calling them COVID jails, but they're not jails.